Drive any back road in farm country in late May, and you will see them. Long rows of peonies blooming in open fields, pink and white and crimson, lined up along nothing at all. No house, no barn, no mailbox. The buildings those flowers were planted beside fell down or burned or got hauled away 50 years ago, and the peonies are still there, still blooming, still holding the line of a front walk that no longer exists. A peony is the closest thing to a permanent decision a flower gardener ever makes. And the strange part is that the whole outcome, decades of flowers or decades of nothing, gets decided by one measurement you make with a ruler in about 10 minutes this fall. Get it right, and you may never have to touch the plant again. Get it wrong by 2 inches, and you will wait years for flowers that never come. I want to start with how permanent this plant really is, because it changes how seriously you take the planting. David Trinklin, the longtime horticulturist with University of Missouri Extension, calls the peony a perennial that often outlives its original caregiver. He has said he personally knows of a peony planting in Missouri that is more than 100 years old, still growing on the property where somebody set it in the ground before the First World War. Those abandoned farmstead rows I mentioned are not a fluke. Extension agents across the Midwest use old peony plantings the way archaeologists use foundation stones. Where the peonies run, a dooryard used to be. Maybe you already know this in a more personal way. If you remember a peony from your mother's garden or from your grandmother's, standing by the porch steps and buried in bloom every year around Memorial Day, there is a decent chance that exact plant is still alive somewhere. Peonies pass through families like furniture, and the one you plant this fall, a knobby bare root that fits in one hand, has every chance of standing in your yard for the rest of your life and well past it. That is exactly why the planting matters so much. With most perennials, a mistake costs you a season. With a peony, a mistake at planting time can cost you the entire point of the plant, and the plant will not die to warn you. It will just quietly refuse to flower, year after healthy green year. So here is the rule, and I am going to state it plainly because everything that follows hangs on it. The eyes of a bare root peony, those pink to red growth buds, sitting on top of the crown like little rose-colored thumbs, go no more than 1 to 2 inches below the finished surface of the soil. 1 to 2 inches. That figure comes straight from Iowa State University Extension and from Penn State Extension. And Iowa State identifies planting too deep as the leading cultural reason peonies fail to bloom. Not the only reason, but the one that shows up most, the one extension hotlines hear about every spring from gardeners staring at gorgeous flowerless foliage, an inch or two of soil. That is the whole rule. And I know how wrong it sounds. We are trained by every bulb we have ever planted to go deep. Tulips go in at 6 inches, daffodils deeper still, and burying things generously feels like tucking them in safe for the winter. A peony punishes that instinct. Set those eyes 4 inches down and the plant will grow. It will grow beautifully. You will get a lush, healthy, deep green mound of foliage that looks like the picture on the package, and it will put out that foliage faithfully for years, and it will never give you a single flower. The plant is not sick. The plant is not dying. It is doing exactly what a peony does at that depth, which is everything except bloom. I learned this the embarrassing way, back when I had more enthusiasm than sense. One of my first peonies went into a border I was proud of, and I planted it the way I planted everything in those days, deep and snug, probably 5 inches over the eyes. Then I mounded soil on top for good measure, because I thought I was being kind. For 3 springs I watched that plant leaf out like a champion and flower like a rock. I blamed the sun. I blamed the fertilizer. I blamed the nursery. The one thing I never thought to blame was my own trowel, and my own trowel was the entire problem. When I finally dug down and found those eyes sitting in the dark nearly a hand's width under the surface, I felt like a man who spends 3 years complaining his television is broken before noticing it was never plugged in. Now, plenty of gardeners hear the 2-inch rule, follow it, and never learn why it exists. I want you to know why, because once you understand the mechanism, you will never plant a peony wrong again, and you will also be able to diagnose half the flowerless peonies in your neighborhood. It comes down to winter. A peony does not merely tolerate cold, it requires cold. To set flower buds, a peony needs a real winter chilling period, roughly 6 weeks of temperatures around 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below. University of Connecticut Extension puts the minimum at about 6 weeks under 40 degrees, and commercial growers who force peonies in greenhouses replicate exactly that, holding the roots in coolers near 40 degrees for 6 weeks, because without the chill there are simply no flowers to force. Cold is not a hardship the peony survives. Cold is an ingredient the flower is made from, and that requirement is where the depth rule stops being an arbitrary number and becomes obvious. The crown has to actually feel that winter. Soil is insulation. The first inch or two of ground rides the real weather, freezing and thawing, tracking the cold snaps and the January deep freeze, telling the buds the truth about the season. Go down 4, 5, 6 inches and the story changes completely. Down there, the soil is buffered, moderated, slow to chill and slow to warm, protected from the very temperature swings. The peony is waiting to feel. A crown buried that deep spends the winter in a mild little cellar. So when spring comes, the buds never got the message that winter happened at all. A too-deep peony is not a broken plant. It is a plant that never heard winter arrive. It skips the flowering program and pours everything into leaves, which is precisely the lush, green, maddening result so many gardeners stare at every June. Once you see it that way, the regional fine print makes perfect sense too. The colder your winters, the more chill there is to spare, so northern gardeners can cover the eyes with the full 2 inches and the buds will still feel plenty of cold. In milder regions, closer to an inch is better. And in the warmest country where peonies can still be grown at all, the eyes should be barely covered, sitting almost at the surface, because every fraction of an inch of soil is subtracting from a winter that was scarcely cold enough to begin with. The scarcer the cold, the less soil you can afford to put between those buds and the weather. One rule, one mechanism, adjusted by climate. That is the entire science of peony depth. So let's plant one, start to finish, the way I do it after 3 decades of borders. This is fall work, and fall is not a compromise date. It is the right date. A bare root peony goes in during autumn because the soil is still warm enough to grow roots for weeks before freeze-up, while the plant itself is dormant and asking nothing of those roots. You get establishment without stress. Spring planting works far less well, and a peony set out in fall is a full season ahead of one planted after winter. First, the spot, and choose it like you mean it, because this plant is not moving again in your lifetime if you do your job right. Full sun, 6 hours of direct light at minimum. A peony in shade gives you the same heartbreak as a buried one. Foliage without flowers, so do not tuck it under the maple for sentiment's sake. Then drainage. Peony roots are thick and fleshy, closer to a sweet potato than a thread, and they will rot in a spot that holds water. If the hole you dig fills with rain and stays full, find higher ground. And if you are planting more than one, give them room, 3 to 4 feet between plants. That sounds extravagant for a root the size of your fist, but a mature clump will claim every inch of it, and the open air moving between plants is your quietest defense against the fungal leaf troubles that bother crowded peonies in a wet June. Now the digging, and be generous here, even though the planting itself will be shallow. Loosen a wide area, a good 2 feet across, and work compost through it. You are not making a deep shaft, you are making a wide, rich, crumbly neighborhood, because those fleshy roots will run outward for decades, and this is your only chance to improve their soil. When the area is ready, look at your bare root in good light. Count the eyes, those pink to red buds on the crown. A strong division carries 3 to 5 of them, and the count matters because a piece with only 1 or 2 eyes can take several extra years to build up to real flowering. 3 to 5 eyes is the standard the extension services give, and it is worth checking before the root ever leaves your hand. Set the root on a firm little mound of soil in the center of your loosened area, eyes pointing up. Then comes the 10 minutes that decides the next 50 years, and I am asking you not to guess. Lay a straight edge across the hole, a board, a rake handle, a yardstick, anything straight. So it rests on the undisturbed soil at either side and shows you exactly where the finished surface will be. Now measure from the straight edge down to the topmost eye. 1 to 2 inches in cold winter country, closer to 1 inch in milder regions, barely covered in the warmest peony country. Eyeballing this is how 5-inch peonies happen, because loose soil in an open hole fools everyone. The straightage does not get fooled. Backfill by hand, firming the soil gently around the roots as you go and firm it well. This part gets skipped, and it should not be because fluffy backfill settles over the following weeks, and when it settles, it carries the crown down with it. A peony planted at a perfect 2 inches in loose fill can be sitting at 3.5 by spring. Firm soil, then check your measurement one final time against the straight edge, then water thoroughly, a slow, deep soaking that settles everything into honest contact. And then, the hardest instruction in gardening: walk away. No thick blanket of mulch piled over the crown. And hold that thought, because mulch is going to matter a great deal in a few minutes. A quick word if your peony is coming out of a nursery pot rather than a shipping box, because potted plants play by a slightly friendlier version of the same rule. A container-grown peony was usually set at the correct depth by the grower, so the safe move is to plant it at exactly the level it sat in the pot, no deeper. The mistake to avoid is the little extra scoop of soil over the top that so many of us add out of habit when we finish a transplant. Brush the surface of the root ball gently before planting and find where the eyes or the stem bases actually sit. Then keep that level at the finished grade. Same rule, same ruler, just with the grower's work already half done for you. Before it does, let me set your expectations honestly, because peonies run on a longer clock than most of what we plant, and knowing the schedule keeps you from panicking. Year 1 after fall planting is mostly foliage, maybe modest foliage at that, and that is success, not failure, because the plant is building its root system underground where you cannot see the progress. Year 2 might bring a bloom, or 3, a preview. Year 3 is when the show genuinely starts, and this is where the peony separates itself from nearly everything else in the border. It does not peak and fade, it builds. The clump gets wider, the stem count climbs, the flower count climbs with it. And unlike daylilies or irises or asters, a peony never needs dividing to stay healthy. Left undisturbed, it simply gets better, decade over decade. You are not planting this fall's project. You are planting the view from your kitchen window in 2046. While the plant does that slow building, your job is mostly restraint, and 3 habits protect the flowers you are waiting for. Go easy on fertilizer, especially nitrogen. Iowa State Extension is blunt that peonies fed too much nitrogen rarely flower well, no matter how good the site is, and a peony sitting near a lawn that gets regular lawn feeding is often getting overdosed without the gardener ever opening a bag near it. A light hand, a little compost, and the plant has what it needs. Watered deeply in dry stretches rather than sprinkling often, a slow soak that reaches well down into the root zone. And late summer matters more than it looks, because that is when the plant is quietly forming next spring's buds underground, while the border above looks like nothing is happening. And leave the foliage standing until a hard frost has finished it. Those leaves are the factory paying for next year's flowers, and cutting them down in August for tidiness is a proven way to thin out the following spring's bloom. After frost, cut the stems at the ground and carry the debris away rather than leaving it to lie, which clears out the fungal spores that would otherwise winter over beside your plant. None of this is work, really. It is mostly the discipline of not doing things. That is the whole planting method: sun and drainage, and a wide, rich bed, and a ruler. Peony depth handled. The Flower Gardener's Bible covers the other 37 plants the same way. $9 at bloomrelay.co. The book cover and address are on your screen now. Back to that mulch warning, because this next part is the failure almost nobody sees coming, and it explains one of the saddest calls extension officers get: a peony that bloomed beautifully for 10 years and then quietly stopped. No disease, no dieback, no obvious change. Just fewer flowers one spring, fewer still the next, then none. What buries these plants is not a storm or a careless shovel. It is the gardener's own good habits, applied one thin layer at a time, an inch of shredded bark mulch this year, another inch next fall because the beds look so tidy dressed, a generous top dressing of compost every spring, which is exactly what we are all told to do for perennials. On a slope, soil creeps downhill and settles around whatever sits at the bottom of the grade. None of these layers amounts to anything on its own. Together, over 8 or 10 years, they add up to 2, 3, 4 inches of new material sitting on top of a crown that was planted perfectly. The eyes that started at 2 inches are now at 5. That peony has been buried in slow motion, and it responds exactly the way a too-deep planting responds. The winter signal fades, the flowers thin out, and eventually the plant goes back to being a handsome green mound. So 2 habits, starting now. First, mulch belongs in a ring around a peony, like a moat, never piled over the crown itself. Keep those few square inches at the center clear, and the plant can take all the surrounding mulch you care to spread. Second, when a long-blooming peony goes flowerless, the very first diagnosis happens with one finger, in fall or early spring, before you blame pests or fertilizer or the weather. Gently work a finger down into the soil at the center of the clump until you touch the eyes. If your fingertip disappears past the second knuckle before finding them, you have found the problem, and it never needed a laboratory. If the finger check comes back clean and the eyes really are riding shallow, then and only then move down the list, because the runners-up are worth knowing too. Look up before you look down. A peony planted in full sun 30 years ago may now be sitting in the afternoon shade of a maple that was a sapling when the flowers went in, and a peony getting less than about 4 hours of direct light will sulk exactly like a buried one. Trees grow, and the sunny spot of 1995 is not always the sunny spot of today. Then think about food, because the overfed peony is the other quiet failure, all that nitrogen pushing leaves at the expense of buds. And think back to last summer, because foliage cut down green in August starves the buds that were forming for this spring. Depth first, light second, feeding third. Patience always. That short list solves nearly every flowerless peony I have ever been asked about. Which brings us to the fix, and the honest cost of the fix. A too-deep peony, whether it was planted deep or buried gradually, is corrected by lifting and resetting it, and the time to do that is early fall, the same season you would plant one, for the same reasons. Peonies tolerate a well-timed fall move far better than their reputation suggests. Dig wide and deep with a fork, get under the whole root mass, lift it, rebuild the bed, and set the crown back at a true 1 to 2 inches, measured against a straight edge, exactly as if it were a new planting, because it effectively is one. Then comes the bill. The move costs you a season or two. A lifted and reset peony typically sulks through the following spring and often blooms lightly the year after, before returning to full strength in the second or third season. That is the price, and it is worth stating plainly so nobody digs in September and despairs in May. There is one more option, which is to do nothing, and in fairness, the peony has a slow escape plan of its own. A buried crown will gradually work itself toward the surface over the years, and a shallowly buried plant sometimes rescues itself. But that self-rescue is measured in many years, not seasons, and a deeply buried crown may never climb far enough. Set the 3 choices side by side. 10 minutes with a ruler this fall, a 2-season recovery after a corrective move, or a decade of waiting on the plant to fix your mistake for you. The ruler wins every time it is offered. Before we go further, one plain warning, so this rule does not get carried where it does not belong. Everything I have told you today is about herbaceous garden peonies, the kind that die to the ground each fall and return each spring, the kind in your grandmother's dooryard. Grafted tree peonies, the woody shrub kind, run in exactly the opposite direction. A grafted tree peony is planted with its graft union several inches deep, roughly 4 to 6, so the named variety on top can grow its own roots above the graft. Penn State gives that 4 to 6 inch figure. Plant a grafted tree peony at 2 inches and you have made a serious mistake. Plant a garden peony at 6 inches and you have made the opposite one. Shallow for herbaceous, deep for grafted tree peonies, and everything else today belongs to the first kind. Now I want to spend a moment on why this plant carries the weight it does, because the depth rule protects something more than flowers. Peonies were the Memorial Day flower before most of us were born. In the 1800s, when the holiday was still called Decoration Day, peonies were among the few flowers open across most of the nation that late in May, and after the Civil War, mourners laid them on soldiers' graves by the armload. University of Missouri Extension tells that history, and you can still see it standing in older cemeteries where peonies planted generations ago bloom along the headstone rows right on schedule. And that American chapter is only the newest page in a very old book. The peony has been in cultivation for more than 4,000 years, grown first in Asia as food and medicine, long before anyone grew it for beauty, and the name itself comes out of Greek myth. Peon was the student of Asclepius, the god of healing, and when his jealous teacher threatened to kill him, Zeus saved the student by turning him into a flower. Gardeners have been passing that story down almost as long as they have been passing down the roots. The plants themselves are heirlooms in the most literal sense, because the great peonies never went out of production. Festiva maxima, the huge white double with crimson flecks on its centre petals, was introduced by the French breeder Miles in 1851, before the Civil War, and it is on sale racks and in catalogues right now, unchanged. Sarah Bernhardt, the great ruffled rose pink, came out of Lemoyne's famous French nursery in 1906, and today it is one of the most widely grown cut flower peonies on earth, the pink peony in the florist bucket and the supermarket sleeve. Between those two comes Duchesse de Nemours, the fragrant creamy white that Calotte released in 1856, still sold, still planted, still winning gardeners over on a name most of them cannot pronounce. When a rose or a daylily gets old, breeders replace it with something newer. A good peony never needed improving. These old French varieties have watched a century and more of new introductions come and go, and gardeners keep planting them anyway. If you order Festiva Maxima this fall, you are not planting something like the flower from an old garden. You are planting the flower itself, the identical variety your grandmother cut, and with the eyes set 2 inches down, it will do for your grandchildren what it did for her. I owe you the honest ledger before the finish because I promised you practitioner talk, not a sales pitch. Correct depth guarantees you the chance at decades of bloom. It does not guarantee a miracle timeline, and it does not repeal the plant's other requirements. That first flowerless season after planting is normal, remember, not a verdict, so give the young plant its 2 or 3 building years without digging it up in a panic. The winter chilling requirement still stands no matter how perfectly you plant, which means the warmest southern gardens remain hard country for most peonies at any depth, and gardeners there do best with the earliest varieties, the shallowest settings, and tempered expectations. And those enormous double flowers come with a mechanical fact of life. A fully open Festiva maxima, after a June rain, is holding a teacup of water in its petals, and the stem will bend to the grass under the weight. A simple grow-through support hoop set out in early spring solves it, and so does the cut flower trick. Taking stems for the vase when the buds are still closed and soft as marshmallows, so the flowers open indoors where no rain can find them. Support or scissors your choice, but plan for one of them. What the 2-inch rule genuinely delivers is the difference that matters most between a peony that blooms for 50 years and a peony that never blooms at all. Every other factor, the fertilizer, the variety, the weather, adjusts the show. The depth decides whether there is a show. So let me leave you with where all of this is going. Some morning in late May, years from now, you will come out with your first coffee and stop on the back step. The clump by the walk will be wider than a bushel basket, dozens of stems, every one carrying buds the size of golf balls, and soft as marshmallows, a day or two from opening. The fragrance will reach you before you reach the plant. Ants will be trooping over the buds after the nectar, doing no harm at all. The same ants your grandmother told you the peonies needed. And the whole unhurried spectacle will trace back to one fall afternoon when a gardener laid a board across a hole, measured 2 inches with a ruler, and then had the good sense to leave the plant alone for the rest of both their lives. If this video earns a peony like that somewhere, it did its job. Subscribe if you want more perennial work done this way, one plant at a time, done once and done right. And when those first buds show color in your own garden, remember, there is no hurry. The peony has more time than any of us. Plant it 2 inches deep this fall and let it prove that.